Yes, thank you very much, Sean. And once again, a very big welcome to all of our attendees, especially those who are members of FEM, IOPSA, as well as SIOSH. We really appreciate that you've taken the time out. And we also appreciate how much feedback we've had from those who are members out in the industry, telling us what you want to hear, what you want to see back from these institutions, and how much you've enjoyed these Tuesday morning toolbox talks. So thank you very much for that. We also appreciate the influx of information as well as questions coming through, so please keep that coming on. This helps us to really design toolbox talks or content based on what you want to hear out there in the industry. For those of you who have requested to share some information with the rest of the group, please do so. If you do not have access to the Dropbox, please get in touch with me and I can explain to you how it's going to be working. We have set up one Dropbox account for all of those who do want content, such as our Toolbox Talks content in the morning, or even some of those templates that we hand out. We're just going to put them on there. Please don't cut them off the actual Dropbox because we do give you those permissions, but just copy and paste them onto your desktop so that you could leave it there for others as well. And then this is the portal, if we could say that, that you can share information as well. And we encourage you to please do that. Please keep the content strictly health and safety. We obviously want to ensure that we keep our focus there. So we will be monitoring that and ensuring that the quality of the information getting through to everybody is of a high standard. Let's get straight into our toolbox talk this morning on responsibilities. Obviously, according to the law, each person at a work site in a company or any organization, including visitors, have responsibilities toward health and safety. Now, responsibilities, or as we like to sometimes term it, it is legal liabilities of every person involved in a specific institution. Every role player, no matter what position you have in the company, you have a specific liability in terms of legislation. So the definition of liable in terms of law is responsible or answerable in the law. In other words, you are legally obligated. Now, when we talk about the OSH Act or the 50 sections of the OSH Act, there are also 21 different regulations that help that, and then a whole lot of standards, your SAN standards, national building codes, there's bylaws, there's municipal laws. There's actually so much information there that govern not just the health and safety, but the overall working of any company. And a lot of them speak to each other and assist each other. But the OSH Act is the one that we will always go to in terms of your liability toward health and safety. Now, in the OSH Act, we speak about reasonably practicable. Now, what is reasonable and practical? What does that actually mean? Well, for one, we first need to understand three things before we want to approach any task or project as a reasonably practical person. For one, we must understand the severity of the risk as well as the hazards, as well as the scope of the hazard. So let's give you an example. If you were to use a hammer to knock in a nail in a company where there are no other people, it's just you and maybe one teammate, and you guys are putting together pallets in order to cart certain stock or equipment on those pallets for the forklift. So you are then fixing that pallet with a hammer and a few nails. How high is your risk? Well, first of all, we'd need to understand the environment that you are working in. We'd need to understand the level of competency on that person for the use or the task being performed. So it's not just, well, it's a hammer and nail, so the risk is low. Well, other factors come into play. Does that person know how to use the equipment? If you say yes, well, then the risk starts getting lower. But if you say no, well, automatically we would put that on a higher risk. So if you understand how this works, you will see the necessity to have a risk assessment done, one that is on site in the environment that it is being performed in. Now, why do we call this site specific? And maybe you guys out there have heard this often. They want a site specific file or a site specific assessment done. This is because using a hammer and a nail at your warehouse, compared to taking those same tools, the same person and the same task, and performing it on a construction site, the risk will change. Performing it in a private home, the risk will change, and so on. Every environment has individual hazards that affect the risk rating. Now let's take a look at using a crane to lift an empty JoJo tank into place. Well, the empty JoJo tank is not very hazardous. It's pretty light, but too heavy for a few people to carry. So we'll just get a truck-mounted crane to assist us. However, because this is lifting, and there is a very high chance of that thing falling and crushing someone, it needs to be planned, documented, and executed in a safe manner. So working with cranes, and we can look at other things, confined spaces, working at heights, working in excavations. For you plumbers out there, working with hazardous biological agents or hazardous chemical substances rather. All of these things increase the risk. And due to the nature of these high risk or high hazard areas that you work in, we need to assess what is the most practical and reasonable steps to take in order to minimize these. And this is, again, it's a risk-based approach. The second thing we need to understand is the state of knowledge that is available on any task, especially the hazards that are attached to that, as well as what are the means to remove or mitigate. In other words, how can we eliminate it completely so that it doesn't affect you, or make it safer for you? And that's not just throwing a whole lot of PPE at it, giving you hard hats and goggles. Yes, we still have to have mandatory PPE, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in order to really make it safe. Training and competency being one of them, and then other things like a system of works, a method statement, a safe working procedure. These are all control measures that we have to put in place. The third thing that we look at is the availability as well as the suitability of these means. So if we say that training this person on the use of hand tools and helping him understand the risk assessment in terms of nailing together these pallets, we will then take a look at the availability. Has that person been trained in the last 12 months? Does he use the correct tools, and has it been inspected on that day? So a lot of other things have to come into play to see the availability of those resources you say are attached to that scope. Is there adequate supervision? Then, if there is the availability of these, how suitable are they? In other words, is it a competent supervisor? Is the training performed in the right manner? Is it aligned to SACWA standards? Or if possible, have you actually used a SACWA accredited training authority to perform a quality standard of training? So a lot of things come into play with just the understanding of the law, and then seeing the means to remove risks from your working environment. And then we look at the availability of these resources as well as the suitability of these. And that is what reasonably practical means. Now, just as a side note, this is the minimum requirement of the law. So if we don't have these things in place, we do not have the minimum. In fact, there's so much more that can be compounded and added onto these types of safety standards, such as behavioral-based safety, ISO systems. There's so much more that you can actually build to have a higher standard of safety. But what we are talking about here is just minimum requirements. So if you see something here or something that we're chatting about that you might not have, please don't feel that you've already failed. You've just identified a gap, and we want to assist you in closing this gap. And we'll give you a few tips later on. But legal liabilities in terms of employers or responsibilities of employers. Well, according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Section 8, and you can go and read this in your own copy, the employer is to provide and maintain, as far as, again, we're going to use that term, reasonably practicable, a working environment that is safe and without risk to the health and safety of his employees, as well as those who are affected by that scope. Providing a system of works with regard to machinery, as well as the maintenance of such machinery. Remember, this is all in the interest of establishing your hazard identification and risk assessment, the elimination or mitigation of hazards or potential hazards before any work commences. Now, a safe system of works basically means a formal procedure which results from systematic examination of a task, and that is to identify the hazard, and then it will define the method, the safest method to ensure these hazards are either eliminated or mitigated to the best possible degree. Then another responsibility is to provide information, instruction, training, and supervision. Scope-specific responsibilities would include handling or production or processing any articles or substances, and this goes even further depending on the scope of work you are performing. Again, we must remind you, these are the minimum requirements according to Section 8. And there's a few more. We just wanted to take just these 5 things to explain to those who are in a position of employers what your responsibility is. But the bottom line is, to the best of your ability as an employer and with the resources available to you, have you made a reasonably practicable decision on eliminating or mitigating the risk to your employees? Remember, you need to be practical and provide a safe working environment. Now, if you want some more information, please drop us a text or an email, and we'll send you through a copy of the OSH Act. If you need it, you can also download it, we can just explain it in layman's terms for you, how to translate what the law is actually saying. Now, employees, you also have a responsibility, and I'm sure sitting there you're saying, well, my employer needs to do this and needs to do that. Well, let's now do some self-reflection as an employee. One of the most important things we must do, and it's the first thing that the OSH Act Section 14 speaks about, is to take reasonable care for your own health and safety, as well as the health and safety of others. In other words, you are responsible for your health and safety, as well as the health and safety of others around you. And things like refraining from causing or participating in the harassment of other workers, cooperating with your employer or any authorized person who gives forth legal documentation or even legal standing in order for you to follow a set of standards or a set of method statements in order to follow that to keep yourself safe, whether your employer or that authorized person. Any health and safety rules or procedures must be obeyed at all time by you. Yes, it must be designed by your employer. Most often, they will just put up the signs. It is your responsibility to obey these. And then if there are dangers or any dangerous situations, you also need to report this to your employer, as well as incidents and accidents that occur. These need to be reported timeously, before the end of shift is actually the required time frame. So your responsibilities, there are a lot. There's actually quite a few more. If you want to know what your responsibility is as an employee, reach out to us again. We'll send you that full list of your responsibilities. But one of the ones that stick out, and this is from Section 15 of the OSH Act, we never want to intentionally or recklessly interfere with, damage, or misuse anything which is provided in the interest of health and safety. And this is from small things to bigger things. Remember, we might think of a risk assessment as just a few pieces of paper that we need to sign. But there is a reason why that risk assessment is there. There is a reason why it tells us to do certain things or to use certain pieces of equipment or to do it in a specific method. If we fail to do it in that safe method, we are intentionally interfering with something that is in the interest of health and safety. So we're not just speaking about PPE, not wearing a hard hat or not wearing your safety goggles or not hooking up your lifeline. Those are very important things. We will always look at those physical, sustainable things that help us on site. But the documentation is also important within that system of works that has been designed. Not signing a toolbox talk attendance register, not doing an induction, not going for medicals. These might not be physical, tangible things that you are touching or using on site, but the overall risk increases the more we intentionally or recklessly interfere with things that are in the interest of protecting our safety on a site. And we're not just talking about construction sites, we're talking about any work site, whether you're in an office, at a personal or private person's home, whether you're at a corporate client, or even in your own warehouse where you are working. All of these will affect you and will affect the risk rating. So responsibilities or legal liabilities for everyone. And yes, that includes you. The minimum requirement of the law applies to everyone, from the employer, employee, client, contractor, all the way down to the visitor. If you could or possibly be affected by one of those hazards or risks, you are legally obligated to obey the safety rules that are set out. And yes, it might vary in the categories of liability. The visitor is not as liable as an employee, and the employee might not be as liable as an employer. But remember, when it comes to the law, these categories remain individual to the person. You are still obligated individually to obey all of these sets of rules that govern how we perform our tasks. So if you accept that risks and hazards are real, you must do something to safeguard yourself as well as those around you. Not everyone knows or understands everything. So work as a team. Start by taking the first step. And this generally is done with an overall risk assessment. How we perform our tasks, what is the scope of work, we get a baseline done, and then we start working into site-specific risk assessments when we move into different areas or different environments. How would you go about creating a safer working environment? So we'd like to hear from you. Drop us a mail, send us a text message, or on our WhatsApp line. How would you go about creating a safer working environment? And we'd love to chat to you about how you go about doing this and see the types of resources that you have reasonably and practicably used in order to make it safe for you and your employees, or as an employee, for yourself and your co-workers. Remember, you do have help. So let's give you 8 tips for successfully changing your view of health and safety. 1, make a list of things that you want to achieve, either as an individual person in the company or as an actual organization. Set this as goals and targets for your company or work area. Then find those practical ways of implementing them, making notes of them. Ask for help if you can. Set a follow-up meeting and keep them regular. Keep speaking about it. Keep trying to improve on what you are putting into place. And then let everyone participate. Do not underestimate any single person in your company with the knowledge or the skill that they might bring. Take charge of your own safety. Start safe, work safe, and then finish safe. Now, the overall guideline is here. Just change one thing at a time. In this week, try and change your housekeeping routine. Next week, change something else and continue. And in a few months to a few years' time, you will see your safety standard greatly increasing. So thank you very much for joining our Toolbox Talk this morning on responsibilities. There's a lot more we can discuss, but we only have a few minutes of time. So the free OHS training, remember these are the last 2 months coming up for November and December. If you are down in Southern Cape, Knysna area, we will be down there in November. The dates have already been sent to you. I know we have a few dates set aside for different classes. And then in Gauteng, December 3rd and 4th is the final one for 2019, and we look forward to trying to do this next year again. So if you need some help or you want to book some of the courses for Southern Cape or Gauteng, please reach out to us, chris@ohss.co.za, safety@iopsa.org. info@ohss.co.za, or the WhatsApp line on 071 875 2070. Thank you once again. We look forward to the next week's topic on Safety 101. A few suggestions that we're going to give to you, perhaps that starting point that you need from the responsibilities you've just heard about. And we're going to hand it over back to you, Sean.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and end the session off now. We have got no questions for you. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us. Please remember the survey on the way out and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.